Hi folks, it's Ryan Burns, and today I'm going to be reacting to Dr. Todd Grande's psychological profile of DB Cooper / Dan Cooper. This guy's got over 1 million subscribers, looks like, and he does pretty well, and this video has over 100,000 views, so good for him. Look, I'm not a psychologist, so I certainly cannot diagnose Dan Cooper with anything, although I do think he was ADHD like me. But we'll see what Dr. Todd Grande has to say. Obviously, like I said, I'm not a psychologist. I won't be able to rebut a lot of the things he says and the conclusions he reaches, but I am a pretty pedantic researcher, so I will be saying some things that maybe he doesn't know. Obviously, he's not a Cooper sleuth like I am. He's not a Cooper enthusiast like many of you are. So maybe some of the things that he leaves out or doesn't know may have actually informed his opinions one way or the other to come to a different conclusion. So I'll chime in whenever I need to, and without further ado, here we go.
This is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks if I can look at the mental health and personality factors that may be at work in the Dan Cooper or DB Cooper case. This unidentified hijacker committed the only unsolved air piracy in the history of commercial aviation. Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoy this content, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. So here I'll look at the timeline of the crime, of the hijacking, and then take a look at the mental health and personality factors. I'll also take a look at the question, whatever happened to Dan Cooper? So starting with the timeline, we move to November 24, 1971, Portland International Airport. This was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. A man in his mid-40s, wearing a white shirt and a black tie, and identifying himself as Dan Cooper, uses cash to buy a $20 one-way ticket for Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 to Seattle, Washington. He's carrying a small black briefcase. The flight, which is expected to take 30 minutes, is scheduled to depart at 2:50 p.m. There were only 36 other passengers aboard the aircraft when it was capable of carrying over 150.
Okay, well, minor mistake there, but hey, why not? Why not? There were 36 passengers, including Dan Cooper. So it wasn't 36 other passengers. There were 35 other passengers.
The aircraft for this flight is a Boeing 727-100. It had an unusual feature, an aft staircase that could be lowered in flight by a single control in the back of the plane, which could not be overridden from the cockpit. This information was not available to the public. While on the ground...
Okay, so there's a misnomer, I guess, there, or just misreading the evidence, I guess. It says this information was not known to the public. Well, it was certainly known to the public that there were stairs in the back. And I assumed that if anyone ever saw the stewardess, lower the stairs, they would know. So how it was done, it wasn't obviously not top secret information that the 727 had aft stairs, and that anybody who pays attention to a stewardess would see her raising it as they're on board. Any 5-year-old in the back seat can peer around and see Tina Mucklow raising the aft stairs. I'm sure that I guess Flo probably did that. Florence Schaffner probably did that for the Cooper flight, but raised the stairs because the passengers did board in Portland because there was construction going on at the airport, at the terminal, and at the gate where the plane was to pull up. So they couldn't use the jetway. So they had to go across and walk across the tarmac and go up those aft stairs. So DB Cooper walked up the same stairs that he left from.
Cooper ordered a bourbon and soda. Not long after takeoff, Cooper hands a note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. She puts the note in her purse, thinking that Cooper is hitting on her. He whispers to her, "You had better look at that note. I have a bomb." I guess he wanted to differentiate that from a pickup line. Cooper opened his briefcase and showed Schaffner what appeared to be sticks of dynamite connected to a battery. He makes 3 demands. He wants the plane to refuel in Seattle. He wanted 2 primary parachutes and 2 reserve parachutes, and $200,000 in negotiable American currency. Now, there's a theory somewhat tied to this that Dan Cooper was Canadian. Another theory is that he was in the military and had served in Europe. because there was this comic book featuring a character named Dan Cooper who, among other things, would parachute out of aircraft.
So I thought I was about to give him some major props there because he transitioned from talking about that Cooper wanted negotiable American currency, and then he jumps right into, there's a theory that Cooper might have been Canadian. Well, that's, a lot of us think that because he said negotiable American currency. He may have also said circulated U.S. currency. We're not sure exactly what he said because it's kind of a game of telephone from the flight attendant to the cockpit to the ground and to the FBI. But it appears that he gave some sort of a qualifier during his demand. He either said U.S. currency or American currency. And currency, not bucks, not dollars, currency. So an odd thing to say. And again, as an American, and any of you who are Americans who are watching this, and I think 90% of you are, would you ever go into a bank with a gun and be demanding money and be like, hey, I want $200,000 in negotiable American currency? No, you'd say, I want $200,000. I want $200,000. I want $200,000 in cash. I mean, we're Americans, right? What other money is there in the world, right? That's kind of the way a lot of Americans think. So, but I mean, that's just not something an American would say if he did in fact put some kind of weird qualifier on there. That kind of sounds like Canadians, especially those who live near the border, who do have to go back and forth between Canada and the U.S. For example, Vancouver, Canada, is 30 miles from the border, maybe even closer. So it's not too far from Seattle. So they go back and forth. So it could be that was just a brain fart on his part, saying I want. He kind of gave away his country of origin, perhaps, by saying that. Because again, no American would ever say I want American currency. Well, we're in America, for one thing, and number two, Americans are arrogant. The dollar is the only dollar that spins, as far as we're concerned. So give us I want $200,000. I want $200,000. Not I want negotiable American currency. Who says that? Bizarre. Cooper's a weird guy, though, so maybe he'll get more into Cooper being an odd guy.
This comic book would have been available in Canada and parts of Europe. If we combine this with the idea that he may have used the term negotiable American currency, that seems to support the theory that he was from Canada. Now, after Cooper made the demand, he put a pair of sunglasses on, and after this he started talking to another flight attendant named Tina Mucklow. The pilot contacted air traffic control, who called law enforcement. The passengers were told that there was a minor mechanical difficulty. The plane was going to have to circle for a while and then land, ensuring that generations of flyers would now interpret that to mean there's a bomb on board the plane. As the plane circled Puget Sound for 2 hours, Cooper was able to identify an Air Force base and the city of Tacoma. So this is something that most people would not have known about. Tacoma maybe, but certainly not the Air Force Base.
Okay, slight issue there. Again, for anybody if this is your first time, I'm not being a prick. I'm just literally being pedantic about this. Not a big deal. He's not a DB Cooper nerd, so don't think I'm being cruel to Dr. Todd. He said that Cooper recognized from the air Tacoma and McChord. Not true. Cooper recognized Tacoma from the air. He said, "Looks like Tacoma down there," which is a clue that he knew what he was flying over at least. Now the McChord thing, the McChord Air Force Base, that comes about because he knew the distance, roughly the distance. We're not quite sure what he said, but he was bitching about the parachutes being late. He thought the parachutes were coming from McChord Air Force Base. Because Northwest Orient told him that, because for a while they thought the parachutes were coming from McChord. And Cooper says something like, hell, McChord's only 20 minutes away, or McChord's only 20 miles away. So he knew at least McChord was, where it was as far as the distance from the airport. So he said it's only 20 minutes. I think he may have said only 20 minutes from SeaTac, but obviously it's a lot different these days. Maybe it only took 20 minutes when Cooper was there back in the 1950s or something. Who knows? Or maybe he was from the area still there in 71 from Seattle. But anyway, he knew the distance to McChord from the airport, and he did see Tacoma from the air.
After 5 o'clock, the money and the parachutes were ready. The FBI recorded all the serial numbers.
All right, well, the FBI did not record the serial numbers. The serial numbers were pre-recorded in a ransom pack. Essentially, the security officer who was in charge of all banks for Seafirst National Bank was a Englishman who had worked for Scotland Yard. I believe his name was Frank Burns, maybe. Burns, hey. But anyway, he decided that he wanted to have a set of about $250,000 of cash just set aside in the vault with pre-recorded serial numbers. That way, in case of an event just like this or a bank robbery, you give them some of that money, right? Make sure the tellers give them that money that's marked. And that way, if somebody walks into a bank, I don't know, and drops off $120 bills, that's going to be a flag trade. That's going to be a flagged transaction, and they will run. And they would check those serial numbers against a ransom list of serial numbers, some kind of thing like that. But it was pre-recorded. The FBI did record serial numbers of other hijackers. I know in the case of Kathy Kirko and Roger Holder. By the way, Kathy Kirko, who was 19, I think, when she committed to her hijacking, is the only American hijacker to escape justice, aside from D.B. Cooper. So she lived out her days, or is still living somewhere in Europe. But Kathy Kirko, the 19-year-old FBI's most wanted, interesting young lady. But anyway, during that hijacking, it took them like 2 hours to record the $1 million, or I think it was $500,000 that they had requested. So it took them a while to record that. But with Cooper, it was pre-recorded. So not the FBI recording it, but the bank recorded it and already just had it sitting there. Very happenstance, I guess. It just happened that way.
The money weighed about 21 pounds. The plane landed at Seattle-Tacoma Airport at 5:39 p.m. As the plane refueled, an airline employee dropped off the money and the parachutes. Cooper released all the passengers and 2 of the flight attendants, including Florence Schaffner. So that only left 4 members.
Poor Alice Hancock. You know, Alice gets no love, does she? I joke that Alice is the Michael Collins of the 3 stewardesses, right? You've got Flo being Buzz and Tina being Neil, and then you have Alice Hancock being the Michael Collins.
Members of the flight crew on the aircraft, the pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, and the flight attendant, Tina Mucklow. Cooper issued very specific instructions to the flight crew. He wanted the plane to fly toward Mexico City at no higher than 10,000 feet, while maintaining an airspeed below 150 knots.
Okay, Cooper never specified a speed to fly at. He just said, flaps down, fly at 10,000 feet, gear down. He didn't say any speed. And that's kind of a problem with if you're trying to figure out if Cooper was trying to jump to an exact spot. He didn't even know how fast the plane was going. I mean, he may have known how fast it could go with the flaps down because they can't exceed a certain speed. And with the gear down, they can't go too fast because it'll rip the gear off. Or it could rip the gear off, I think. I'm not sure if it would, but it could. But he did not specify a speed for the aircraft to fly.
He wanted the flaps to be set at 15%, the cabin to remain unpressurized, and the landing gear to remain down. Because of Cooper's conditions, like the flap settings and the speed, the aircraft could not make it to Mexico City without refueling. So the plan was to refuel in Reno, Nevada. The plane took off at 7:40 p.m.
Just to interject, that it was actually going to take 3 refueling stops. They were flying dirty, they called it. They were in such a terrible configuration for fuel efficiency that normally, in normal conditions, the Boeing 727 could go all the way from Seattle to Mexico City on a single tank. But with that configuration, with flaps down, gear down, it was going to just consume a lot more fuel, and they'd have had to go to. They were planning, if Cooper was still on board, to go to Reno, then to Yuma, Arizona for a second refueling, and then to Mazatlan, Mexico for a third refueling. So it would have just been an ordeal if they had done that.
Military aircraft followed the plane. Cooper told the flight crew to remain in the cockpit and keep the door closed. At about 8 o'clock, the crew noticed a warning light indicating the aft staircase had been opened. Over the intercom, they offered to help Cooper, but he declined by saying the word no. Likely, this is the last word he ever said, unless he had something colorful to say before he hit the ground. It is believed that he jumped out of the plane at about 8:13 p.m. because at that point the pilot had to correct for the tail section of the plane moving upward. The pilots of the military aircraft did not see Cooper jump out of the plane, but considering it was dark, raining, and Cooper was dressed in black, this is really not that surprising. The plane landed at Reno Airport. Cooper was not on the aircraft. Also missing was the money and 2 of the parachutes. The FBI did find a clip-on tie, a tie clip, and 8 cigarette butts. Now, as law enforcement tried to identify potential suspects, one individual who was of interest to them—
Oh, for God's sake. Don't say it. Don't say it. Please don't say it.
—was a man named D.B. Cooper. A local reporter confused that name.
I thought he was going to say McCoy. Okay. Yeah, Daniel Barry Cooper was this guy's name. He was a Vietnam veteran, a local in Portland, and they knew he'd come back kind of shaken up from the war and was causing some trouble. And they were like, well, there's a Dan Cooper. There's a Daniel Barry Cooper. We call him DB, and that was like and a reporter intercepted this over the airwaves. They were eavesdropping, and it became DB Cooper. Thank God, because it's a lot cooler than Dan Cooper, isn't it?
With the name Dan Cooper, and that's how he got stuck with the wrong name. An expansive search started involving hundreds of people. It continued on and off through the spring of 1972. Nothing connected to Dan Cooper was located on the ground during that search.
The last search was actually in 1973, the last ground search. So they did ground searches, a very small one in 71, then a huge one in 72 with the Army, and then another smaller one in 73, right below the flight path. And that's when they concluded that, I'm sure he'll get into Cooper dying. It sounds like he thinks Cooper died, but the FBI did not think he died. Larry Carr, a very recent FBI agent, and I have a full 3-hour interview with him on this channel. Larry Carr thinks he died, but all of the agents back then thought he lived. The head of the Seattle FBI office was interviewed in 76 saying, yeah, I think he made it because of XYZ. He listed the reasons. And there's a interesting FBI document where they in 73, they did a search right under the flight path to see it, because if he had died, he'd just fallen right down. And when they found nothing in a quarter-mile wide area, they were just like, yeah, it ends by saying there is no evidence that hijacker's parachute failed to open, which is essentially saying he lived. Okay, that's FBI code for saying that this guy lived.
Despite several reward offers for anyone who found even one of the marked bills, none of the money was ever discovered in circulation. November 1978, a deer hunter finds a placard with instructions for operating the aft staircase on a 727 in Castle Rock, Washington. February 10, 1980.
Okay, so that placard there is not from our plane. We've got photographs now that show that placard was on the plane when it landed. So that is not a placard from Flight 305. It's not related.
80. An 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram is with his family on the Columbia River in an area called Tena Bar, not far from Vancouver, Washington. He finds 3 bundles of cash on the riverbank. 2 packets have $120 bills, and the third has 90. Ingram's parents contacted the police. The bills matched those given to Cooper. There are various theories about other evidence being recovered, but these 2 items, the placard and the money, remain the only evidence found on the ground reliably connected to the case.
As I said, the placard is not reliable, and even if it was, who gives a shit? Sorry, it wouldn't help us find Cooper. Even if it was from the Cooper plane, it makes no difference.
Fingerprints were recovered on the airplane. None of them was ever matched to a suspect. DNA was recovered from the clip-on tie. It also was never matched to anyone.
Okay, so just for anybody who's new, the fingerprints that they recovered from Cooper's area, from where he was sitting, were all partial prints. So it seems that he was obfuscating his fingerprints somehow with glue or maybe had burned his fingerprints off with chemicals by intentionally or by working in a chemical field. But his fingerprints were all partial. Okay, so it seems like, and those were the main partial ones. They did have a palm print from him where he pushed up off the seat getting up. So they have a very good palm print of Cooper, and they think that's the only real print of Cooper's that could be used against somebody if they ever had a suspect. And they did oftentimes. That was one of their main things they did. If somebody didn't like being harassed by the FBI for being a suspect, they would say, look, give us your palm print and we'll leave you alone. And they did. So they had a lot of confidence in that palm print being Cooper's. The DNA, of course, from the tie is just, it's crap. It's 3 partial profiles. So 3 different people have DNA on it. And that tie was passed around like a joint at a frat party. They put that thing in the mail and sent it to FBI offices all across the country to show to suspects' wives. Oh, or ex-wives, did your ex-husband, wear a tie like this? And they shake it around and here, you hold it yourself. Look at it, that sort of stuff. This was before DNA, so there was no care taken for evidence in such a way. They weren't wearing gloves or anything like that. They didn't care if they sneezed on it. They didn't care if they if they touched it, if they were going through the drive-through, the FBI agents who were taking the tie to Mrs. Newman down the road, they're stopping at a McDonald's and eating their French fries, and then they pick it up with their hands. I mean, there was no evidentiary care for the tie as far as DNA went. So very unlikely, in my opinion, that any of those profiles are Cooper's. Very, very unlikely, I think, at this point, because they did that for 30 years. I think sat in a box, was passed around, sat on desks of various FBI offices. There's rumors that an agent may have worn it as a Halloween thing at an office party. Hope not, but regardless, it was not taken care of. And so that DNA is not from Cooper, almost certainly.
Now moving to the mental health and personality factors.
Thank you.
Cooper's interactions with Tina Mucklow, brief interaction with the other members of the flight crew, and the technical details of the crime offer the only insight into what his personality may have been like, because, again, he was never identified. Tina Mucklow described him as polite, nice, articulate, calm, and even thoughtful. For example, he ordered another bourbon and soda while the aircraft was circling Puget Sound. He offered...
Where in the hell does that come from? No way. Where would that come from? That is I have never heard that, because it didn't happen, but if it happened, I would have heard it. But I wonder where he got that from. That is not... No, let me know in the comments, people, if you know where he got that from. That's not... Obviously, it didn't happen. We have Tina Mucklow very vociferously saying in multiple interviews at the time he refused all further drinks or refreshment offers. So this guy was John Wayning it in the plane. He was a hardcore guy. He had his bourbon and 7-Up and spilled it, actually. So I think he probably drank enough of it because it didn't spill enough. It seems like it didn't spill liquid. It probably just spilled ice because the stewardesses didn't mention having to clean up any mess. So it probably just spilled the ice, and you push the ice back in the drink if it's empty, right? So I bet he downed his bourbon and 7-Up. But after that, once he became the hijacker and put his sunglasses on, he did not have any drink or refreshments. And one of my buddies, it's weird to say you have a buddy, but one of my little buddies is Martin McNally, who did a Cooper copycat hijacking about 7 months later. Jumped out with $500,000. It blew off his body. Never saw it again. Spent 38 years in prison. But Mac, we call him Mac. Mac's a great resource because he is a real DB Cooper that I can send a text message to. I remember asking him about that. I said, Cooper didn't drink anything after he became the hijacker. I said, you were on the plane for 8 hours or whatever. I said, did you drink anything? He goes, no. He goes, I didn't. He goes, I didn't drink anything or eat anything because I was afraid they would poison me. And that's not a irrational fear. I mean, that did happen in other hijackings where flight attendants would spike a drink of a hijacker. There's a rather famous incident. I believe the guy's name was Glenn Tripp. In his first hijacking, he was killed. He was mentally a little ill, sadly. But Glenn was killed in his second Cooper copycat attempt. But in his first one, they spiked his drink. I think they put Xanax or something in his They kept spiking his little Cokes or whatever he was ordering. And he became so loopy that as he was getting loopier, he kept lowering his ransom demands. So it was like, okay, he started out, I'm taking over the plane. I want $500,000. But as he got more like loopy from the Xanax, he kept lowering it. I want $200,000 in parachutes. And this is not a joke. His last demand, and this is all in the papers. I mean, it's true. He was so loopy. His final demand was, I want 3 cheeseburgers and a Head Start in a getaway car. So 3 cheeseburgers and a Head Start. My friend Darren Schaefer of the Cooper Vortex loves that. But yeah. So yeah. So it's very likely that Cooper denied further refreshments for that reason as well, is that he didn't want to be drugged or risk being drugged by one of the flight attendants. And that's probably why, I would think, because I mean, the guy had smoked 7 cigarettes in a couple hours, and I'm sure he had some dry mouth going on, being nervous. Even though he was calm on the outside, he was certainly nervous on the inside. But anyway, back to it.
To pay for it and give her the change, because stealing a drink was where Dan Cooper drew the line. There's a theory that he may have been in the military, specifically the Air Force. Pointing toward this, we have his knowledge of the aircraft and his knowledge of parachuting. Pointing away from this, he chose the inferior of the 2 parachutes, and he chose a reserve chute that was actually sewn shut. It was only supposed to be used for training. Evidently, it was included by mistake.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, the parachute thing is unfortunate because Larry Carr, again, he's been on my show, FBI agent. When he first got on the case, he was kind of a little bit behind on some of the things, and his statements to the media have been repeated a lot. Okay, statements he made in 2007, 2008. And one of the things he talked about was that Cooper chose an inferior backpack parachute, and that he also jumped with this sewn on, or this training parachute, right? What an idiot, right? So let's deduce that he was military because he chose a military parachute, and we can deduce that he was also stupid because it wasn't a real parachutist because he jumped with a reserve front chute that was sewn shut and had training written on it. Well, we know that not to be the case because the parachute he chose was probably the better parachute, MB6 parachute, just like that one behind me. In fact, that is an exact replica packed by the man who packed D.B. Cooper's parachute. Anyway, and we know the chute that he didn't take because it's still in the museum there. It's in the Washington State Historical Museum, and it is inferior to an MB6 if that is what Cooper jumped with. So he actually chose the superior parachute. Okay. And the front chute, he never could have jumped with that, okay? Those little front chutes over there, they require D-rings on these parachutes to clip on. And the parachutes that Cooper was given did not have these D-rings, so Cooper could not have jumped, intending for that thing to be a non-functional parachute to be his reserve chute. So he chose the better parachute, okay? And he could not have jumped with the sewn-up training parachute because he couldn't clip it onto his parachute, onto his backpack. So both those statements are wrong. So we can't deduce anything from that.
Some rare chemicals were identified on the tie clip later on, making it appear as though Cooper may have worked as an engineer at a chemical company. He did not have an accent. It would appear that either he was American or Canadian, like I talked about before. He clearly planned the crime carefully, selecting an aircraft with an aft staircase and one that could fly slowly at low altitude. He selected a flight without too many passengers on it. He knew to ask for more than one parachute, and he knew to retrieve his note. So that note he gave to the flight attendant, he took that back. Despite his planning, he made several crucial mistakes. He left behind physical evidence. Obviously, he didn't know about DNA at that time, but it's still surprising he would leave anything behind. The jump conditions were not even remotely safe. 150 knots is a slow speed for that aircraft, but it's still far too fast for parachuting. It was also windy outside, raining, and cold. With the wind chill, it would have been below -60. He was jumping through the clouds.
Say what? Okay, that's hyperbolic. No, it was. I can't say what the wind chill would be, but I believe that it was 22 degrees at the altitude he jumped, because the FBI went and looked at the National Weather Service and all this other stuff. And we have that in the FBI files that have been released. And it was 22 degrees at the altitude that he jumped. And on the ground, it was 44 degrees. So, I mean, the freezing to death or freezing is a little, that's way, 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 way overblown. Okay, Cooper was not going to freeze to death on the ground or in the sky. And it was light rain showers. It was not a storm, not a blizzard, not a thunderstorm, blizzard, not a freezing rainstorm, as the media like to say. It was just light rain showers. And hey, if you're under a canopy, it's a good place to be in a light rain shower. Why not?
So he could not see a potential landing site, and he was jumping into the wilderness. He asked for a parachute that was non-steerable. He didn't ask for any other equipment that could have increased his probability of survival, like a helmet, other protective gear, survival equipment. Also, he had 2 drinks of bourbon, which is not something that would have helped him.
Okay, so again, I'm hoping that my videos can really raise awareness. Like we should have like picket signs like, hey, raise awareness. We should have I should get like a little like Lance Armstrong little bracelet, or a pin. I can get a color pin, for maybe like olive drab pin or olive drab bracelet for remember the mystery bag. Okay. Remember the mystery bag. This is very, very, very critical. Okay. We don't know what Cooper looked like when he actually jumped out the plane because he had 30 minutes alone in the back. We kind of know how he had tied everything to himself because looked like he was ready to jump, but he had a bag with him. Okay. He had a bag that was almost as long as the briefcase and it was about 4 inches tall. Okay. What was in this bag? No idea. He never used any item from it during the actual hijacking. Okay. Because he didn't, miracle a pistol out of somewhere, right? So, no, I mean, the only thing that Cooper pulled out of his pockets during the hijacking was some cash that he paid his drink with, a pocket knife, and cigarettes and matches. Okay, but he had this bag with him. What was in this bag? We don't know, but it had bulk to it. It was something that was in there. Okay, goggles, gloves, boots, perhaps. Who knows? But the idea that Cooper jumped out the plane looking like what everyone thinks Cooper looked like when he jumped out the plane, probably not realistic. He probably, in my opinion, he was prepared in so many other ways. It seems like he'd be prepared to jump out the plane as well. He probably had, we know from other copycat hijackers, this is why they're important, because people are people, right? Humans are humans. It's something about experimental archaeology, it's called, like reenactors or whatever. Think about how the Romans, take the Romans for example. People will go, oh, I wonder the Roman legions, how did the Roman legionaries carry their shields when they were on the march, when they were just walking around, Well, they probably carried it the same way you would. Comfortable is comfortable for a human. Humans haven't changed. Our evolution hasn't changed that much in 2,000 years. So, however people sat on the ground back then, they sat on the ground now. Humans are humans, right? So we can look at these copycat hijackers and kind of learn a lot because people are people. And all of these copycat parajackers, they were called parachute hijackers, had bags with them. They either had a bomb with them or a briefcase bomb, some of them like Cooper, or they threatened it, or they had a pistol or whatever. But they also had with them a extra bag sort of thing. And we know from these people talking to them and learning after the hijacking, because these people were caught, so we can talk to them, and they gave interviews. Pistol in there, gloves, some rope, although Cooper didn't have rope with him because he had to cut the shroud lines out of one of the reserve parachutes. But certainly these guys also had goggles, gloves, things like this. So boots. So Cooper had something with him. So he was not as ill prepared as people might think, in my opinion. I don't know. It could have been a king cake from New Orleans or something in the bag, right? I don't know, but he was on a mission, so it was clearly whatever was in there was something to help him either as he jumps or to help him get away once he lands on the ground. So we just don't know. And we call it the mystery bag. Very, very important, okay, for Cooper.
So with all this in mind, we are left with multiple theories of mental health and personality. I will look at 2 major theories here. Theory 1. Cooper was a career criminal who bumbled the execution of the crime. So under this theory, Cooper was a psychopath with symptoms of antisocial personality disorder, He was impulsive, irresponsible. He jeopardized everyone on the aircraft. He committed the crime to get the money, so escape was his plan, and his arrogance led him to believe that he knew enough about parachuting to survive that jump. Similarly, he automatically believed he knew enough about survival in the wilderness to survive freezing temperatures and rain wearing a suit and loafers.
Wasn't freezing.
Under this theory, there's a degree of desperation. He drinks the bourbon to keep his cool. His financial situation was dire. He was willing to risk everything to get the cash. Here he is polite because he thinks that'll help him get away with the crime. So
Yes.
he was manipulative. Also with this theory, he would be a loner, independent by choice, or perhaps due to his personality. So to conceptualize his personality, I will be using the 5-factor model. I remember the big 5 traits through the acronym OCEAN: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So here we would see, with this theory, low openness to experience. He didn't even bother learning everything he needed to know to survive the jump. Mid-range to low conscientiousness. It really took everything he had to be as organized as he was. Mid-range extroversion, low agreeableness, and mid to low neuroticism. Now moving to theory 2. Cooper was a sensation seeker who executed the crime according to plan. So under this theory, Cooper was excitement seeking. He wanted to pull off a crime that would become infamous. He knew that realistically he could never spend the money. It was never about the money. He also knew or suspected that he could not survive the jump. That's why he didn't prepare for the jump in a way that could have made his survival likely.
Okay, so again, like mystery bag, okay? Get my olive drab bracelet, okay? Mystery bag. Remember the Alamo, remember the mystery bag, okay? Cooper was prepared for the jump, in my opinion. Now, it is strange. It is strange to just ask for generic parachutes, right? He could have asked for, we look at copycats like McCoy. McCoy asked for, he wanted commander parachutes, okay? I mean, he wanted specific parachutes. Cooper just said, give me parachutes, right? So, yeah, I don't think he was a master parachutist by any means. He's not a skydiver, right? This is not his cup of tea, really. But I think he had faith that he could do it. And, yeah, it was not some suicidal jump. Again, the copycats, some of them jumped in worse conditions than Cooper did. My buddy Mark McNally jumped at 330 miles an hour, probably a record for a non-ejection, okay, to survive, okay, for a civilian to be doing this at the time. I'm sure it was. But yeah, 330 miles an hour, and he had never even put on a parachute. Okay, McNally had never even put on a parachute in his life, and he survived at 330 miles an hour out of a plane in the darkness. We have a parajacker, Bill Hahnemann, who jumped out into the mountainous jungles at night, mountainous jungles of Honduras. They flew from Dulles in D.C. down to New Orleans, where he did not like the locals. He called the Cajuns. He said he told a flight attendant, Cajuns are tricky. Actually, I share a birthday with this guy. He was born 40 years. Was it 40? No, 40 years. No, 60 years to the day before I was. So I like him. He's a little odd fella, Bill Hahnemann. But he jumped out into the jungles of Honduras, and I don't know what his parachute experience was. He certainly wasn't a paratrooper or anything like that. So he was in the Air Force in World War II, but he landed fine. We have a guy who also had never made a parachute jump. Richard LaPointe jumps out. He was in Vegas and jumps out over the snow plains of northern Colorado, okay, and lands and breaks his ankle, or almost breaks his ankle pretty badly. Cooper's jump wasn't some like suicidal thing, and I think this guy has this image that it was a suicidal effort, and it just was not. We've got 5 copycats, and all of them landed safely enough to walk away. LaPointe limped away, but didn't get very far before he was caught. But he also jumped in the daytime, which was just all the chase planes saw him jump out. What an idiot! But anyway, so yeah, but yeah, we don't really have a lot of these thrill seeker suspects. We've got one who's his name's not public information yet, but some people know who he is. But he's a decent suspect, I guess. And he's our first thrill seeker suspect who you go, well, okay, well, maybe this guy wanted to do an infamous crime just for the hell of it, knowing he couldn't spend the money. This is the kind of guy who would do that. But that's rare. Hijackers were generally mentally ill. I mean, again, I feel like a broken record for people who watch my show, but imagine yourself doing this. Imagine tomorrow waking up and walking to your local airport and saying, hey, I have a bomb. Give me $200,000 or I'll blow the plane up. I mean, this guy actually did that. I mean, he woke up that morning and was like, hey, I'm going to go do this. I mean, he's facing death, facing life in prison. It was a death penalty case. At the time, very briefly, hijacking was a death penalty case, and it was at the time of the Cooper hijacking. They could have, they probably would never have given death penalty to anybody unless they killed somebody on the plane. But it was a capital crime at the time. So Cooper, rolled out of bed that morning and was calm on the outside, sitting on an airplane, smoking cigarettes, threatening to blow the plane up for his own profit. So that's not a normal brain. That's a desperate person or a criminal. In my opinion, I'm very much leaning toward his first explanation that he was a psychopath, I guess. Now, psychopath, of course, doesn't mean you're Charles Manson, but it means also a sociopath too. It means you don't care. About inconveniencing thousands of people. Think about that. It wasn't just the people on the plane who were inconvenienced. They shut down the Pacific Northwest around Seattle the day before Thanksgiving. People were stranded at the airport for hours and hours and hours as this drama is unfolding. So inconvenienced thousands of people. Could have had people killed. Okay, so Cooper's not a good guy. We had this image. Chris Cunningham coined the phrase Han Solo in a business suit. He's not a lovable rogue, in my opinion, at least. People may differ, but I don't think so. He's nice. He's a pleasant hijacker, but we can look at again. Martin McNally was pleasant to his crew, but Marty was also a career criminal. Basically, at that point, he had become one. McNally was casing a Brinks truck when he heard the Cooper story on the radio and said, hey, he goes, that's a better way to get a score than robbing this Brinks truck I'm looking at now. So criminal. And he was calm like Cooper was for the most part. So I tend to think that Cooper was this was not his first rodeo. I'll just say that. And obviously he had so little care about inconveniencing thousands of people, and he did this for his own profit. So that's not a very empathetic person. And you can say, well, he ordered meals for the crew. Well, yeah, he also offered them Benzedrine, which is like Adderall. He gives like, hey, can you keep these guys awake? That sort of thing. And the stewardess said, they'll never take your pills. And he put them back in his pocket. But I say, Ted Bundy was a nice guy up until he wasn't, right? So I don't think Cooper was a nice guy. At the time, at least, it's like I asked McNally. McNally came to CooperCon several years ago, and we all love Mac. He's a favorite of the community. But you ask Mac, would you have killed somebody that day? He goes, oh yeah, absolutely. So he would have murdered somebody that day. That was his mindset back then as a younger man before he spent 38 years in prison. So. And especially Cooper being older too. This is a guy in his mid-40s probably. So I tend to think he was a criminal. Just my perspective. I don't know how you're not. Either you're mentally ill or you're a criminal-minded person. And all these other copycats, they were either criminals or they had mental illness like PTSD from the war. But Cooper was too old, really, in my opinion, to have been actively suffering from PTSD like the Vietnam copycat hijackers were. He's more in line with my buddy Mac, the felon, criminal, who had already been convicted of a felon. I made sure when I interviewed McNally at CooperCon a couple of years ago, I made sure the first thing I said was, hey, when you committed this hijacking, were you already a felon? He goes, yeah. So that's kind of what I think Cooper was.
This explains why he was polite and calm. There was no reason to be angry, as escape wasn't the plan. Under this theory, he would not have been a career criminal. He would have been a skilled worker, like an engineer or a chemist, as I talked about before, who just wanted to get more from life. He wanted to go out with a bang. He drinks the bourbon because he enjoys it, not because he needs it. So here he would be alone, but not a loner, perhaps someone who recently lost a spouse or otherwise was separated from his family. His personality profile under this theory: high openness to experience, his intellectual curiosity demonstrated by his knowledge of the aircraft, although this trait would largely be unsatisfied, so he'd have a need for adventure that he did not meet. We would see high conscientiousness. He paid for that second drink, even though the cat was already out of the bag, right? Everybody knew he was a criminal. Low extroversion. He was analytical. Mid-range agreeableness, consistent with an engineer and someone who could be selfish enough to commit a crime, but also have enough tender-mindedness to appear thoughtful. And we see he would have extremely low neuroticism. Now, of course, there are myriad other theories that are variations of these two, but no matter what theory I'm talking about, he did appear to have low neuroticism, and he appeared to be in a situation where no one missed him. There were no reports of a missing person matching his description around that time.
Because he didn't die.
So perhaps he was single, never married or divorced, and estranged from any family that would have expected him to show up on Thanksgiving. Although, of course, this is based on the idea that he did not survive. So this brings me to the last question. What happened to Dan Cooper? There have been a seemingly endless number of theories about Cooper. It's theorized that the FBI has investigated over 1,000 suspects. Many people have confessed to being Cooper, but many of those suspects had a significant dissimilarity from Cooper in that they were alive at the time they were being investigated. It's fairly likely that Cooper died on impact or shortly after impact because...
Nonsense. Like, just nonsense. Parachutes work. Okay? And this idea, what's going to kill him in this jump? Okay, I mean, he's not landing in water, just in case newbies are watching. D.B. Cooper did not jump near water. I know that that money was found on a sandbar near the Columbia River, but Cooper did not jump within 10 miles of the river. Okay, we know roughly where he jumped, and he didn't land in water. I mean, there's just not. It's just very, 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 very unlikely. Okay, and and again, we have this. I mean, just for the new people, there's this concept that Cooper jumped into the wilderness. He did not jump into the wilderness. Okay, Cooper jumped into even if he landed in the woods of this county, he jumped into a county with a population of like 120,000 people back then, bordering Portland, which is 500,000 people even back then, right, or whatever. And that county that he jumped into now has about 500,000 people living there. That's Clark County, Washington, and is massively grown up. So, and another problem with this thing too is, how does the money get to Tina Bar? How does the money get 10 miles away if he dies on impact? I mean, you have to come up with some theory where somebody finds his body and then takes the money and does something with it and then buries him to where no one can find it and gets rid of the parachute. And again, the idea that he no-pulls, this idea that he just splattered on the ground, you look up statistics, and it's about 1 out of every 1,000,000 skydives is a no-pull. And a lot of those are people, I probably can't say the word, but they're unaliving themselves, we'll say. So yeah, it's people pull. I mean, you have one job, pull the ripcord. This is your life. I mean, who would not? They'd probably pull it immediately. A lot of them would. So yeah, I mean, anything could happen. His head could have hit the stairs when he jumped off or whatever. I mean, but bottom line is that where he jumped is nowhere near the money find. And so how would the money get there if it's tied to him? And so it just, I don't buy that really at all. And again, the FBI concluded at the time that he lived, they all thought he lived. I have an interview with one of the original FBI agents on my channel here, John Detler. Very much believed that Cooper lived. In fact, that was my first baptism of when I first talked to him of the FBI. He seemed surprised they even asked the question. When I first talked to him on the phone, I said, well, do you think he lived? And I was like, lawyer to lawyer. Who's a lawyer? I said, lawyer to lawyer. I've known you. Been talking to you for 3 hours now. What do you think? He was like, well, I think he lived. Of course. We would have found something if he had died. And I agree with that. I mean, found something. I mean, you're not going to find a body just sitting there in the woods that's got a parachute on it and everything. But animals would have done their job on Cooper's remains pretty quickly. But, where's that going? Where are these things? Where are these items? Well, that one and that one. Where's the money bag and the parachute? The things aren't just going to disappear. And again, people are looking for these things. I mean, Clark County, Washington is D.B. Cooper country, right? You find a parachute somewhere, by God, you're calling the FBI about it. And they did all the time. FBI files are full of people calling, saying, I found something in my backyard. I mean, so, no. Cooper lived, landed, fine, stashed the parachute. I mean, who knows if he spent the money or not? Maybe not. But there's a lot more circumstantial evidence to think that he lived than to think he died. It's almost lazy to think he died, in my opinion. It's just kind of a lazy thought.
He was injured. He was never found because of a number of factors: the vastness of the search area, wildlife dragging his body away. He could have landed in the water.
Nope.
Somebody could have found his body and disposed of it, although I don't know why they would do that and never spend the money. They may have realized they couldn't spend the money. It could also be that he landed well outside of the search area. There are theories that the plane actually took a different route than originally thought because the pilot was flying manually.
Wrong.
If somehow he did manage to survive the landing, it's hard to imagine he could make it out of the forest alive. If he survived...
Why not? I mean, again, this is not the Yukon where Cooper jumps. He is not jumping into the wild. Okay, he is jumping. The plane is over I-5 interstate when he jumps. Okay, pulling into Portland. All right, that might be the number one biggest misconception of the Cooper case, is that he jumped into the wilderness. Cooper, if he jumps a little bit further south than many people think, he could just as easily land on somebody's house. Okay, I mean, again, this is a county of 120,000 people. Okay, now granted, where the area where he jumped out wasn't as densely populated as it is now, but he's not going to wander the woods and die of starvation and, I'm eating grubs and berries. I'm DV. No, all you do is land and figure out which way is west and walk, and you're going to run into I-5. Okay, not a wilderness. Okay, I think that the reason that exists, that idea exists, is because most film footage we have of the Cooper searches going on is the March 72 search. Okay, and that took place. They were based out of Lake Merwin in Ariel, Washington. And yeah, Ariel, Washington has some mountains and things and some kind of really rough terrain around there. But that's as far north as Cooper probably jumps. Okay, everything south of that is gravy. I mean, in fact, where some of the FBI, Larry Carr thinks that Cooper jumped around Orchards, Washington, and that there was a skydiving center at the time in Orchards, Washington. I think he probably jumped somewhere between Battleground and the Lewis River, probably, is where I'm thinking these days. But still, not a wilderness, not just as likely to land on the ground than land in a tree, okay, in a field. So that is, so I think it's because of all the film footage mostly comes, it kind of reminds me as a baseball fan of Babe Ruth, right? We have this idea that Babe Ruth was a fat guy. And the reason is because by the time that games were there was more film of games happening was when Babe Ruth was older and he was fatter and out of shape. But Babe Ruth, was an awesome pitcher. I mean, Babe Ruth could dunk a basketball, apparently. His playing weight was 220 pounds almost his entire career. So he's not a fat guy. He had a fat face, really, but not a fat guy. So it's kind of the same thing. It's like, where does the footage come from? And the footage for Cooper searches all comes from Ariel, this kind of really ugly terrain area. So I think our mind just thinks that that's what it looked like, and it didn't. His drop zone did not look like that. Plenty of open fields in his drop zone. Okay, and there's film footage of soldiers walking through open fields looking for Cooper. So not a suicide jump, and certainly wasn't going to die in the forest in a county of 120,000 people. No.
Survived the landing and escaped the forest. It seems likely that he lost the money, probably in the jump. There would be no reason for him to leave some of it behind and take the rest. that would be used against him. Also, under this theory, he would likely be dead at this point because of his age. This case exemplifies how some criminals can be quite organized. He made a lot of mistakes, but he also managed to do something that had not been done before or since. I think he really just took everybody by surprise. Certainly in current times, it would be impossible for many reasons to replicate this crime, not the least of which is the no bombs in briefcases policy that has been adopted by most airlines. This case has also fascinated people for years, somewhat like the Zodiac murder case. Every detail of the case, including all the various suspects, has been examined thoroughly by many people. It's amazing how many suspects seemed really quite viable, how many people matched his physical description, were familiar with aircraft, understood airline procedures, had been a paratrooper or otherwise knew how to jump out of planes, had experience with explosives, had a criminal record, and could have been or were in the area at the time of the crime. Now, I know it's really just statistics and probability, but still it's amazing that so many people had all those characteristics. It seems at this point, the case will remain a mystery forever. So it's pretty much considered closed by most any standard. So those are my thoughts on Dan Cooper, or D.B. Cooper. If you have any opinions and thoughts, please put them in the comments section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting.
I did, Todd. I did. Thank you, buddy. Yeah, that was good. I mean, just a recap of the case, but yeah, fine. I guess a milquetoast reaction there. I probably didn't provide too much insight, but this idea that he died just irks me. And that's not, again, I'm not rooting for Cooper to get away from it. I mean, Cooper is a jerk. So it's not fanboying D.B. Cooper or anything. I mean, he probably deserved to die, honestly, for being such a jerk. But I don't think he did. There's just no evidence at all that he died. Like none. Okay, none. And there is good evidence, circumstantial, that he lived, just because nothing has been found there. And the money being found miles and miles away from where it happened, right? So, this seems unlikely that he perished that night. And also we have 5 other guys doing the same crime. It's not, jumping out of a 727 is actually a pretty safe thing to do. Skydivers like to do that. They used to do that. They don't do it anymore, but they used to jump out of 727s. It was called like doing a Cooper or something, it's a stable platform to jump from, honestly. It's not a bad thing to do. So in fact, the day after the hijacking, Boeing, in the AP article that went to 400 papers nationally, there's a Boeing spokesman going, "Oh yeah, it'd be an easy parachute jump. I think you would just go right down because the engines aren't going to interfere with you, and you just go right down." And I think there's like a FBI file where J. Edgar Hoover's like, "Shut that guy up! Who the hell would say that?" Because all you're doing is encouraging copycats, and sure enough, it kind of did. There were 16 or so copycats who tried it, and 5 actually jumped out with money tied to them and a parachute. So, and all survived. So there's no reason to think that Mr. Cooper didn't survive either. So anyway, all I've got for today, folks. So like and subscribe and all that YouTube-y stuff, and I will talk to you guys again soon. Bye.